That's super easy. Very super. Chapter. That Jesse to Timothy to do here. We look at it many 17 years. The Jesse did Timothy to do. And we look at us here.
So, I don't know if you remembered all the different divisions of the outline, but this is under the main topic of what is the definition or the defining attribute of correct cognition, and then there were 3 points about it. First one, finish the first one. The second one and the third one is to dispel the objection that the definition is too broad and includes different forms of awareness that aren't truly forms of valid cognition, but meet what has been described as the defining attribute of correct cognition, and therefore implying that the definition or the defining attribute is not precise enough. It's too broad. So that's the subject.
That is said that the Jesse Tangman Semanate Milu Yuri Chirishina, local Jampa Jesse Dini Churches, Semani to Menduti, Rande Ziki Semanami, Sushi, Tosi, Java Mayaba, Dini, Laya, Jendesin, Tati, Samangamati, those in the Samangamati, Java Mayaba Pala, and could the JCT, the sugar tea, and JCT, you jugare, around the Ramanchi Jubama Tapina, Samangamits, Java the Yamba in it, JCT to never. Samati top with Jabati Maya Besa, Namagi to be ever. Then Javan Mayam de Palati, Nike Samati sugar did Lamb could you very much. Koran around of G. You better, you pay out my is. Just I teach him my age.
So at this point is addressing the form of awareness, cognitive awareness, category of cognitive awareness that is not in this school recognized as valid cognition. And the Tibetan term for that is jeshe. Jeva means it means to cut in the sense of to distinguish. So it's a kind of distinguishing awareness or discriminating awareness. I don't know the original Sanskrit term for it. Some have been proposed by other translators. I'm not sure that it's correct or not. And so the Tibetan word is jeshe. Jeshe is generally a form of awareness which is subsequent to the original or the initial or the newly generated correct cognition, which is in this school the necessary quality for being identified as valid cognition. So then, in the way this topic is introduced, it's saying, well, that so-called subsequent cognition, which is correctly apprehending its object, is it therefore not a form of non-deceptive awareness? And therefore, is it not also incorrectly to be identified as a form of correct cognition? So that's the form of the objection. And so it's described here in the root text as lo kunzoba, I think it's the what it says. Or just kunzoba, it says. Kunzob ni. Kunzob is usually the word that's used to translate conventional truth. Can say also a conventional awareness. So here the commentary describes that conventional awareness as the form of subsequent cognition that is memory. It's a form of Jampa. So Jampa Jeshe is what is, the commentary says, is the meaning of the conventional awareness here. And it says, then Dharmakirti is saying, that is not held. Minder means we do not accept, we do not hold that that is a form of valid cognition. And then the reason comes right before it. It says, because that subsequent cognition is the apprehension, the awareness of something that was already grasped previously by the genuine form of valid cognition that occurred initially. Okay, so then the way this recognition or subsequent cognition is described is saying that when the initial valid cognition occurs, then the strength of that valid cognition, if it remains for a certain period of time, if the force of that valid cognition is not diminished, manyamba means if it's not weakened, then it has the ability to initiate these forms of subsequent awareness that are holding the import that the valid cognition originally determined, but they're not doing it on their own. So the valid cognition sort of did the hard job of determining the correct understanding, and this one is sort of riding on the tail coat of that. That's using loose language, but that's the way it's understood. If for instance, if the strength of that original correct cognition, if enough time goes by, or if it loses its vitality, then that subsequent cognition does not have its own means to apprehend that object. And so that's the basis for denying that it represents a form of valid cognition. It is apprehending something that's something else, the valid cognition already determined to be correct. And so we don't, therefore, it's not itself a form of valid cognition.
That in no kundubasia, Tichidam, Kundubsia, Jumbalasia, Netibe.
So.
That is a Kunang to the next meeting of Chile. No, Kai, but it.
No.
Jumbali.
No, so.
You cheated Chile.
No.
Kundub Singer, no Kundubasia.
No.
Now the Nandiarba. Now should done it to meet the Chile. Chidam Kundub Singer Jumbalasia. Jumbasina. No, to the nature meeting barrage. None in meeting the Jumbasia. Not in Basina, local to the none in meeting. The Muslim kind but nitty none to the around there, none to the silver. Or these are that local to the city, not Jambas, they say the good. Topa is that. No, to the nature meeting the Lord of Chile.
Topa.
No, sir.
So they might ask, well, why is this subsequent condition described here or identified using the term conventional mind. Gunzoba. So Gunzoba is also the term that is sometimes translated as relative truth when you're talking about the two truths, relative truth and ultimate truth. And so there are various ways of interpreting the literal meaning of that term that we're calling conventional or relative. And Gunzoba is one of the interpretations of it is that it is based on the root that it obscures something from the root, which means to veil something or to cover something up, cover up the way things truly are. And so in that sense, sometimes the word Gunzoba is interpreted to mean a mistaken mind or a false mind, in the sense that the way the object appears to it is not in keeping with its true nature. So in other schools, it's used to, in relation to ultimate truth. But here, we don't need to think of it in that sense, but rather the fact that we still can use the term in the sense of being false, in that unlike, say, in the direct perception, the way in which the object is appearing to the mind that perceives it corresponds to it. And that represents the quality of the valid cognition. But this subsequent cognition is also a conceptual mind. This recollection is a conceptual mind. And conceptual minds, by their very nature, are somewhat false in that you're using the thing that appears to the mind is not the object, but it's an image of the object. And so, in that sense, what is appearing to the mind of a concept does not match the nature of reality. So if we want to have a more precise description of what that word subsequent cognition, how to understand literally what it means in Tibetan. So it is I don't know, it says cut, but cut in the sense of determining. So it's a kind of determining mind. So why is it called a kind of determining mind? It's a determining mind. The determining part of the term is a reference to the correct cognition that preceded it. And so sometimes they're used the word drondok. Drondok means something that is falsely attributed to the object, some sort of misunderstanding about the object, something that's falsely attributed to the object. Then what correct cognition does is it cuts that in the sense that it eliminates that misunderstanding and determines its true nature. So the determining aspect of the word subsequent cognition is a reference back to that correct cognition. And then it's an awareness, it's a determining awareness in the sense that it then re-engages, once again engages, layang jupa means, it engages once again the object that was determined to be valid by the former correct cognition. So that's literally what the term jishe means.
That didn't. Now, Katis, they, Mila Sobe, almost Sawala, Dene, young, to the Samamayino, Stayachi, never. So, almost Mila Sobe, almost Sujinga Yarba. Almost Sujinga, the Kusheva Mari. Nia, Ani, almost the Ongola Soga Sawa, that Dene, Net to don't talk to guys. Then it's some of my Senate, that's some of my cigarette. That's some of my best cigarette. Good. Don't talk to guys, cigarette. That is my Rahi number, Sharon. When I start to learn, maybe learning is that no, so many shavers could be at least. 참아놨다. 아니 쉐바지 비아리스.
No.
참아니 인디 전에 치를 맞추게 되고 두지. 너네 또 쉐바이 베지. 다시 참아서야 돼 쉐바지 공부지. 무슨지 다원도서 유지. 유튜브 쉐바들이 유튜브를 도지를 봐.
No.
뭔가 다원
Drochiga.
소지 도지를 받아.
No.
나는 미식이 아니
Namaste.
이리도 소세하고 통양을 도지도가 당제지하라 봐.
No.
이네야 그 원고들이 쉐브들이 수지 된거 말봐.
No.
이게 된거 말봐. 원고 들 때니 이디 원고세 마세기 유세 마세 진거를 봐.
No.
이네야 미국 원고들이 수지 진심이야 말이지. 재산 다시 참아들을 때 시어가지고
So this is now within the definition. No, worship. This is the main subject. Is what is the essential nature of the definition of correct cognition? So this has three parts to it. We finished the first one, which is to giving a definition, the correct understanding of what the essential defining attribute of correct cognition is. Now we're going to the second section of this topic, which is identifying what is the object that this definition applies to. So it's the tenshi. Tenshi would be then the thing being defined. What is the category of things that are defined by this defining attribute? The attribute is applied to something. So what is that class of things that it applies to? That's here tenshi. So then this sort of example, counterexample that doesn't seem to apply is identified in order to say, no, it doesn't apply to that. Because what the root text says is that loni temani. It says that the quality of being, and now we can't say correct cognition because that implies mental. We have to say the quality of being correct measurement or correct apprehension of the object applies only to the mind. So loni temani. So this is set up in the commentary by saying, well, isn't it true in the case of sensory perception, for instance? Sensory perception, all forms of consciousness have two factors for them to occur. The outer factor is the object. The inner factor is the faculty. And when we're talking about the five forms of sense perception, the five sense faculties, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, they're physical in nature, right? So then, is it not the case that they play an integral role in the occurrence of correct cognition? So should that unerringness, that is the real essence of correct cognition, shouldn't that also apply to the faculty as well? Do you not have to have an unflawed or an unimpaired faculty in order to be able to develop, for instance, correct eye cognition or perception of blue? So then, for example, when you look at letters, if the letters are unclear, you take a magnifying glass or something. The magnifying glass serves as an aid, then able to see the letters more clearly, or if you have bad vision, your eyeglasses do the same job. So are they not an essential part of perceiving the thing? And it says, and here it uses that phrase, dön toba. So it's saying that this phrase came up before. Dön toba means then the ability to obtain some desired object. And obtaining the desired object is also how to understand the idea of being non-deceptive. My understanding is that obtaining the desired object carries over to the idea of achieving what your aims are. So then, is not the faculty, does that quality not apply to it? It helps to obtain the correct awareness of the sense object. So therefore, is it not also pramana? And that's the question. So, and then to reject that idea, it says he's referring to the root text. So when the root text says the quality of being pramana pertains to mind, so that's the answer to that is saying no. Faculties, despite their role, the fact that they contribute to correct awareness, that does not endow them with the quality of being an essential form of correct cognition. So it says that to describe the word mind here, it says the mind is that thing which is newly undeceptive in the sense that its object appears to it. So the thing that when you say something the object appears, that you're using a phrase which only applies to something mental. So the faculty is something that is involved in the process of having the object appear clearly, but appearing clearly can only be associated with something mental. So something that is newly non-deceptive, again, means newly non-deceptive in the sense of how that object is appearing to the mind in a newly non-deceptive way, and that can only be mental. So that's this this point saying that the definition of correct cognition does not apply to non-mental things. So another really, I think, good example is if you take in the darkness, you take a flashlight and you turn on the flashlight and shine it in the darkness, then the light from the flashlight certainly has a significant role in enabling you to obtain an awareness of objects that would not otherwise be visible to you in the dark. So in that sense, the flashlight corresponds to an analogy for the faculty. However, the appearance of the object is something that is associated with the mind. The object doesn't appear to the flashlight. The flashlight helps the object to appear to your mind. So mind is the principal element when we're talking about correct cognition.
Seme chebe debu karisha ude, seme machibe debu karisha ude, esena, that seme chebe debu de, any, the Lanjata Torje, Mogo Yiri Tolela, give Juba Situta, Tabu Lanjata Torje Habu. In a Lanjati to Yamsuneata. Tojati Pato Yagi, Chingurva. They use it at the Partola, Utope, Sanati Chevrolet. That different Lando, you say, Ambulance, Dojum Nusu. In a young man, Jutu, the part of the cheat. Share some of them pretty quality children.
Temperature said, Lancha di Norne, Lancha Maimba, Lancha di Simna, Semi Mature was singular.
That
Close.
Pena, Tatanda, this year did Karisana. Seme Machibe deputy Karishasana, Seme Machibe deputy Tisha. Many long Karisure. Seme Chubata Machibe deputy to in the Chelsea. Rayu the number share when I start to Milu Loti Loti chair. The Seme Machibe deputy Karishasana, get over. It to the Samadi Shaw. Rayu the number share any Loti, the city, but Rayu number share Loti, Samasilva.
Not. Don't let just not children.
Oh, around me. Don't touch us. Cook. Rayu Karasuri. Send a match of a city. Rayu number share Loti. Samarva. Rayu number share Loti, you to the summer, a match at 2 inches. You to the summer, the summer match of it.
Matches the bar matches.
Oh, dear. Then Rayu number share Loti is jet. You know, Rayu to the summer part match of 2 moves. Rayu the summer match of it. Rayu to the summer Tisha. Deputy. Who Karisha to the Karishas in the much decent Karison. Rayu number shall go Tisha. Rayu number shall go to you. Near Rayu to the Samati in Mutugasti, Rayu to the Samati, Kuni Parchu Yamarva. Mochi Barchiva. Dojar Vicheva. Sini that Suja Vicheva. Sini that Suja Bachu Marva Shaman.
No, Mashawe con
the Tambutil, Sene Chuba, the Machibe able to give it to in the church. Sene Chube able to give it, Namjata to Jam Mova you, Tolena, give it to be in the church. That is, you, the land that Jam like Tolen, Jupati, Tolen Chiati. Seme Chube able to shop. That Samati Machibe able to give it. You know, city. Rayu number share a lot, you know, you to the time of Pamacha to which you to the Samati, Seme Machibe deputy. Seme Chumachi is the correct Rayu number share a lot is here. You know, Rayu to the time of Pamacha to which Rayu to the Samati. Rayu number share a lot in a Machibe. Central was a Chirva. Rayu number share a lot, singing the Rayu to the Samati, Sunday. What is that? Rayu number share a lot, you know. Rayu to the Sama Pamacha to City, Sanema, Rayu to the Samati, Sima Machibe Lasha. That's a Machibe the land that or Jerry, Dinishin. You Tolena Jupati. That give up Rayu to the Samati Yarba. Rayu to the Samati J. Rayu to the Samati, now the Nish, Shaper. Teachers Nando net Shaper the Tenny. Donation Nanjet Shania and Panjet Padur. Nanjet Shania, Nanjet Yamsun. A debate cutting room to that. But he is a dead Senate Chubet.
Di Yauno several di Namashawe con ane kalsa seme kalsa
Namba Shave Conesa, the Lua Mebe, Loni Chichi, Telai, the Tenesiva,
네네.
Rayu number share of Satu with the Shiva, said the Satu Milu Shiva Terabata.
네네.
It's Tenesiva.
네네.
Diana, that's Rayu of the Tamati we are. It's a diva.
맞아.
Tend to make it on the chair. Just a subject to it. Rayu of the Tamati. Send much with the boost. There would disagree, even number share a subject. Lower with the Shabbatation.
This is kind of subtle. It follows from this assertion, which is saying, which is rejecting the idea that the faculties have the essential attribute that applies to correct cognitions. So that is being rejected by saying that the element that is central to the nature of correct cognition is the fact that the object is appearing to the mind newly and in a non-deceptive way. So that mental aspect of how the process of cognition occurs is being asserted here, and then that element is being carried through with the next statement, which is which introduces the notion that the principal function of correct cognition is to enable the person who develops it to apply himself or herself to adopting those activities and practices that promote one's spiritual development and abandoning those practices and activities that are antithetical to a spiritual development. So, langcha, and langcha means thing to be adopted. Dorcha means thing to be abandoned or rejected. And so these are two central kind of a dichotomy that applies to the central activity of spiritual, a spiritual pursuit. So pramana is to be the central element in pramana is the mind, because when the mind develops that quality of having the unerring nature of the object appear to it, that's the thing which allows you to use the awareness that you gain by that act to apply it properly in the context of identifying what is the thing that you properly should pursue or adopt, and similarly identify those things that you should properly avoid and reject. So then there's a phrase here that kind of still is a little bit troubling to me, and I'm not absolutely certain about it. It says that the mind, this is a phrase, this is a line that says, Tseme Jerba Dang Ma Jerbe Jerbu. So Jerbu means result. The result of the pramana, being, in this case meaning correct cognition, then it says being able to be, and then cha and macha here is, I was confused about it. Rinpoche explains it to saying that it means uninterrupted, in the sense that the ability of the real nature of the object to appear to the mind is what qualifies it as being a pramana in the true sense of what a pramana is for. And therefore, once that engaging clearly and unerringly of the object by the mind, that's the principal quality that enables you to apply yourself to those things which need to be adopted and avoid those things that need to be avoided. And so if that cognitive event occurs in the way that you gain that clarity of perception in not only sense perception, but in the sense of cognition or awareness, when that occurs, that's what gives you the resource that enables you to be able to apply yourself. And so that's why we associate pramana with the mind. That's the best I can do with what I'm saying, but I think that's kind of the gist of it.
That the Teme Machibe Jerusalem, Jerusalem Mari, Sini Della, Teme Machibe Jerusalem. Sunja Della, Teme Machibe Jerusalem. Satu Miliveri, but Satu Miliveri Shevati, Diriba, Teme Tirba. And Temati Satu Miliveri, Sunja Diriba. Sunjati, Sunjati Samatisha, Satu Miliveri Shevati, and Tini Diriba. That the Karesina. Tini della Tini di Sunjati Georgia Chiba.
Georgia, that's all.
Sunjati, Tini di Tema Georgia di Karisha, Sinusa to military Batisha. The is a D Sunjati Tema much better Busha. Tini della Tema much better Budisha.
Sinicor.
Tinikra. Pepuni de Marva. Sendurba. Sendu Yasani. Suddenly Shibatam Samani Ballad Church in the Maturva. Nini Samashin Machu, Temple Matches, Puni Mojirba. Dobata de Gil Chinis, Gil Sunderba. These are Semi Machibe, their Busia Picaresina, Sunja Parasha. Semakarasha. Semi Machibe, G. Busia, Sini Disha. That is Sini data, Sunjani Buti, Remarba. So that is you double cheating, Joker.
Good Georgia.
Suddenly, but it's some Joji, that didn't be Joji to the gaming that
So this is very technical, not technical, but sort of, what should I say? Not ordinary statement. So it's language that's used to talk about the relationship between the tenyi, which is the defining attribute, and the chenja, which is the thing that's being defined. So the thing that's being defined is the correct cognition itself. The correct cognition itself is mind. The defining attribute of that type of mind that we call correct cognition is that knowledge or that awareness which unerringly perceives its object for the first time. So then here it was saying that quality of perceiving the thing unerringly for the first time, then we added this idea that perceiving it unerringly for the first time means it's talking about the way in which it appears to the mind, how that object is becoming evident in the mind's field of awareness. So it's that sort of defining attribute is determining or is is integral to understanding what it means to call something a correct cognition. So then it says, so the best that I could do to try to clarify this language is to say, it says that this defining attribute and the thing that's being defined, they're not separate things. They're not like Legos that you take apart. The defining attribute is part of the essence of the correct cognition itself. Nevertheless, when we use the language to identify the defining attribute, that is the way that we establish what it means to be a correct cognition, which we think of as the entity being defined, that meaning the mind itself, that particular kind of mind. So then, so there's this idea of, the defining attribute is not really a cause in the sense that it makes the that it causes the correct cognition to come into being, per se, not that kind of causality, but they're using the word cause in a more figurative sense or in a looser sense. It's just saying that it is the basis, maybe, instead of cause, for identifying what it is to be that correct cognition. And in that sense, the thing being defined is the result of or what is understood by that defining phrase or that defining quality. So there's a relationship between the two, and so this language gets kind of hard to for me to try to precisely put into words in English. That I'm sorry, it's the best I can do.
That's it. That's it. That's it. Ngombo to be chamati. Meeting ngombo shaura. Meeting.
Okay.
Just a tit. When language in it, language of China, language to be chamati, language you near language to be chamati. Language to be chamati, that the meetings which
Down so long.
language to be. When the Kyoina, Kyoto to be chamati, and Kyoati meeting Jenny, Kyoto be chamati. Kyoto be chamati, Sasunatine, Kyoati, Yamsunia, King, just a Kyoati. Any Kyoto be chamati, Masha said. That could do in the Jerva, near the Kyoati check. Kyoati meeting Jenny, Kyoto be chamati. In a Kyoati Landu, Langella, Yamson Lane Yerba. Just a Yamson Hati Landu, the Landu, you would the Landu, Tambulando, you would shade. Shades at the Langeti Yamson Yatam, Torjati. Paya di yang nature was.
No,
Ani Langdor la Jupati, Cemetery to
Cemetery to
that you somebody in Jebunus of Chiria. The Tambo Langdor in Neto. God's has to let Langdor Yanel Juba. They did that the
chip to
the chat. Oh, Tenema chip at the declaration and Langdor la Jupati.
To chits in the Temacora. The cemetery to jets in that does correct. So this is a very now this is new to me and really fascinating. So it's talking about correct cognition the role that it plays in spiritual practice. So that should make your ears pick up. So something that is an entity, an object, something that the mind can engage. There is something that we may or may not know it to be a virtue, but the virtue for an act, for instance, or a mental state, but it's an object, it's an import. So that's something that has to be engaged by your mind. Your mind has to determine it as a virtue, right? So then when your awareness then has, kind of operates in such a way that it's able to have that object appear to your awareness in a way that you recognize it as being virtuous, right? Then then the quality, the essential quality of what it means to be a correct cognition is operating, and as a result of that, you develop what we would say is a correct cognition about what a virtue is, right? So once we've determined what the virtue is and understood it as a virtue, then we're able to, through our own knowledge, we're able to recognize, oh, this is something that I need to pursue. This is something that I need to take up. This is something that I need to adopt. So that is the phrase in here is that the point at which correct cognition gives you the capacity and the ability to apply yourself or engage in virtues as things to be adopted, and non-virtues, by a similar analogous process, as something to be rejected, then in either of those instances, once that correct cognition has been developed and it exists in your mind, then that becomes the drupje. Drupje means the establishing agent. So that cognition becomes the establishing agent by which you recognize the so-called result, or the circumstance, the consequence of having created or developed the cognition that you have the ability to engage in it. So teme chöbe jebu means the result of what the correct cognition has established or determined is that you now have the ability, you have the awareness, the knowledge, the capacity to know virtue as virtue and as something that needs to be engaged, and so then that gives you the opportunity or the skill by which you can in fact follow through and carry out that kind of activity, spiritual activity. So the correct cognition itself is the mean. So the same word as drupje sometimes means like the proving agent. So the correct cognition is sort of what enables you to prove, to gain the result of proving that object as the thing which you need to engage, or that other object as the thing which you need to reject. And so that's mental. That's something that's mental in nature, and that's why the mind is the principal quality for what we want to identify as correct cognition. That seems to be what's being talked about here. So to me, that's wonderful. Okay, so then the next point is the heading for it is Tenshi. Tenshi means the pramana itself, right? The thing being defined, or the thing being Tema means illustrated, right? Being explained, right? The object to be explained is what is a tema, and the thing that explains it is the phrase that is the defining, that puts into words what the defining quality of that is. So then the thing which is a tema, the thing that we want to say is a correct cognition, is itself validated, is the ability to determine that our correct cognition possesses the defining quality, which is that it's the original or the new non-deceiving awareness of its object. How is that determined? Is it determined by that correct cognition itself? Does it validate itself? Or is it something else necessary, separate from it, that you have to rely on to look back at it, in fact, and say, oh yes, okay, now I can say that's a correct cognition, which is the case. So this is kind of the next point, is which of those applies, or perhaps both, but at any rate, this is what we're talking about. So then it says, if it's an all or nothing matter, if it's to say that all correct cognitions are self-valid, then what follows from that is there would never be any need for one to distinguish between what is a pramana and what isn't a pramana, because it would be evident, it would be self-evident to everyone, not only humans, but even, for instance, in animals. An animal, in its own, sense perception, will perceive an object, and if its faculties as an animal faculty is unimpaired, then the object that it perceives is a correct cognition for that animal. But does that animal have the capacity to know that, in fact, that's a correct cognition? We'd like to say not, right? It's an animal. Right? So then that would seem to imply that in order to determine the correct cognition to be something that for which that defining attribute applies, in order to determine that, we have to we have to use something else to make that determination. So that's the second alternative. If that's true, then that thing which allows you to determine, say, that the sense cognition is a valid sense cognition, and that's the basis for it, then how do you know that that thing that's validating it is itself correct? Well, then you'd have to do something else that validated that, and so on, and you have an inferred recourse. So both of those alternatives seem to be untenable, right? So the question is, how do we resolve that point?
That is.
Thus,
That is an other that is Jampa, and Raleigh never sharing it. Chabayamaris. Running every Chabayama. Running every Chabayama. That running ever sharing every Chabayamaris. Raleigh chicken, some machine degree, Raleigh children, some machine, my giver, yet to me to Yaris. Society, Raleigh. Jampa, ne, Raleigh never sharing it, Jampa, my Indian, Raleigh never use, sharing never is. The Raleigh never dies of Muslim Samade, Rangu Topana, the Deji, Miluya. That running Muslim Samajes, running most of the Shivati, most of the Titina, and Shivati the age the middle in the chatting and totally is running everything.
running Muslim fever.
Running Muslim day, Shivaran, Miluat, Mitch, the Sema Kaji Rangi Shaja Tobe Yule Chi Yume Tani the Tamade Milu Tamaniku Top Twitch. Tadia Tamadela and Ryan Yamson Rangi said you told a Kitana Ladimus nature is. Sema Kaji Rang the Jews to cemetery never came to that. Rang the chief to cemetery, and never came to it. Is that is
Close.
cemetery.
That's it.
Cemetery.
The running more toxin So in the root text, let's read the commentaries and identify what part of the root text is talking about. So the question has been set, and so then the commentary, the author of the commentary, has written it in such a way to answer that seeming, we call that dilemma, right? He says, as a matter of fact, it's not the case that all correct cognitions are self-validating, nor is it the case that all correct cognitions are validated by something other than themselves. That's the answer to that dilemma. And he says, okay, and what's an example of the former? And what's an example of the latter? So there are cases where the cognition itself, the correct cognition is self-validating, and there are other cases where the correct cognition is validated by something subsequent. So in the first case, in the first instance, self-validating, then in the root text, now get the root text. It says, it is realized by itself, of its own nature. Rangle rangingoto. So that correct cognition realizes itself by itself, right? Realizes its own nature by itself. So that line, it realizes itself by itself, is explained as saying that element of this Yogacara school theory, which that says that there is a self-awareness, there is an element of our consciousness, which is kind of the, what would you say, sort of the witness of everything that goes on in the mind. So there's kind of like another aspect of the mind that perceives everything that our main mind and cognites. And that kind of second quality of the mind is that self-awareness. Rangrik in Tibet. So that rangrik is a kind of direct perception, right? Direct rangrik munsum. So that rangrik munsum sema, that direct perception of, say, so when we have perception of the blue color, as I said, there is a form of the mind which perceives the mind perceiving the blue color. So that element of the direct perception, that is self-awareness, that is the mind realizing its own nature as being correct. Right? So that's a case of self-validating correct cognition. Okay. So because that form of self-awareness is undeceiving, unerring in the way that it cognizes the sensory part of the direct perception. And it is able to do that on its own, right? It's not relying on anything else. So he says, nature means we can observe that. And that seems to be saying that when we perceive things, then we are able to recognize that we perceived something. I'm just talking about recollection. Well, how do we know that? We know that because there had to have been that self-awareness element of the sensory perception, which allows us to be able to remember that we perceived it. And that sort of tag-along self-awareness part of our perception is the self-validating part of correct cognition, in the case of sensory perception. And then he says there are other cases, other kinds of correct cognition, certain other correct cognition, and when they perceive their object that they determine correctly, then that correct cognition occurs at a certain moment, in a certain set of circumstances, but it's not validated, it's not recognized to have been a correct cognition until some later Chinjongi Tanyechebe Tsema. So Tanyechebe Tsema, Tanye means, it was really the word for conventional awareness. Conventional awareness means our ordinary, kind of like our ordinary experience. Through our ordinary experience, then we can determine that what we perceived was correct. And that subsequent experience enables us to verify that the former cognition was in fact a correct cognition. So that's and that subsequent conventional awareness is unerring with regard to, or is able to determine that original cognition was unerring with regard to its object, whereas that original cognition itself was not self-determining as unerring. So our experience tells us it was unerring.
That is the Tuban Sama Giba said the Sheriba, Sama said the Timothy Sublimity class, that teacher. That the Tuban Sama did the days Tuba Sangeting that is Sublimity, didn't demolish that shit that Hamjala started moving, but it at the 이 탐지 팀벌과 아티 그 참았던 거에서 저상 두방 참았던 데서 이제 사람 미루어 왔어. 그래서 그래서 정말 지어 정말 두바스. 정말 두바스 정말 충분했어요. 정말 두바스에 상계 중대 대지 따버는 주 재미있게 말이스. 주 탑시인이 공부할 때니 저만 탑시인이 공부할 때니 이 재미있게 충분했습니다. 이 따버는 주 재미있게 보니까 뭐 따버는 주 재미있게 그래서는 어디 신다 있는데 좀더 이슈 아니 참가시면 우주세도서 그런 재미있게 보는 뒤에 봐. 아니 따바 인식이야. 다디 이 여왕만 부지금 아니 탑식을 떠볼 공부할 때는 중앙에 있으면 이란 말 봐. 당근에 두두를 치봐. 사실 시기야 봐. 누구한테 그랬으면 당분간에 상기 두두치 한 말이지. 네, 저와 누나 탑식 공부가 더 드시는 거다. 주소수가 탑식이 공부를 때리니 잘 반제 탐제방 시대 같은지 방도비 탐제는 수도 하지. 아니 뒤에 지켜야 되는 거다. 그래서 정말 기뻐하셔야 돼. 그렇게 가르쳐서는 따가는 주기 재밌게 보이는 거니까. 네, 동가상계티 네, 조항하고 네 탑식을 똑같아. 공부했더니 네 반도인데 요즘도 배웠으니 어저께 상계 참만 주바스 어저께 네 그래서 되는 돌아치 동바스 이 어디 주는 쪽 니들이 이 저도 막 공부할 제 무슨 또 니들 대시에다 또 방바디시 또바디시 이제 접시도 수비들이 또 방바디시도 또바디시 반도이 됐어요. 아니 접시도 단가 수비들이 소초부들이 시비에 랑이 들이치다가 신을 스킬파티니 시베관에 두자는 라는 거같았습니다. 아니 그랬더니 쪽을 제가 하지 저기 좀 두자간 거 수술 비우던 제가 또래가 초두부들과 어디 산다들이 만들기 참아주가 세트들이 어다다지 참아도 되게 시작하다 다지는 맞으면 되는 것보다 어떻게 되지?
So these are indicative of the Buddhist epistemological schools understanding and explanation of what constitutes correct cognition. And so in these opening verses of the second chapter are meant in the general sense of what constitutes correct cognition. So that main attribute was that thing which is original or new in its unerring, that non-deceptive perception of its object. And we talked about the action that doesn't just refer to the essence, but also refers to action. There are all these various kind of related points that, all taken together, are the kind of filling out what that phrase, sadhu lua, which means to be non-deceptive, newly non-deceptive, that essential phrase, what that really means. Once that has been presented, and there are still a few more verses and a few more points that we haven't yet talked about. Once that full presentation of the overall meaning of correct cognition as a form of mind has been put forth, then the verses, I think it's the seventh verse, the opening part of the seventh verse says, the Bhagavan, right? The Bhagavan is the Gyumed, it's the Buddha Shakyamuni, is the one who possesses that pramana, it's that form of correctly recognizing or cognizing the nature of and all the relevant objects for achieving all the spiritual goals, and for what those goals are and what are the ways of achieving those goals. And so it's saying the Buddha possesses those qualities. So he is the Tsemekibu, he is the being who possesses in the highest sense the quality of being unerring cognition of things. However, the attribute is not simply that the Buddha is the unerring cognition, or possesses the unerring cognition, but rather he's someone who achieved that status. Or Buddha means he became that. He achieved that through a process of cultivating path over countless lifetimes, practicing the two main causes of compassion and wisdom. And so the meaning or the import or the significance of saying the one who became such an authority in the sense of being correct cognition is to contrast the nature of the Buddha with the notion of omniscience and omniscient creators that are the beliefs, part of the belief systems of non-Buddhist grammatical traditions, or whatever phrase we use, the traditions that consider it called Brahma, the creator of the world, or Ishvara, and the notions of that sort of divine creator is Takpa Rangjung. In Tibetan, the word Takpa and Rangjung. So Takpa means, literally means permanent. Nitya means, but in Buddhism means it is that permanence. From the Buddhist perspective, what's wrong with it is that it means unchanging and permanent in that sense. So anyway, that will come. I don't know. I think probably we'll talk about that. And then Rangjung means Swayambhu, right? Swayambhu means something that's self-originated and has always existed. So the primordially existent, uncaused, eternal being that is omniscient and in most instances also is considered to be the divine creator. Well, when we think of Buddha as the ultimate authority and source of spiritual knowledge, we don't think of him in that way at all. We think of him as someone who previously was not such an authority, but became such an authority, Pramanavarttika. And he became that through cultivating the main principal cause for that, to attain that status. And once he attained that status, right, the status in the forward, in the initial presentation is Sugata and Savior, Joba. And so between those two, Sugata is generally means the aspect of enlightenment, which is called Rangdan Kunta, the perfection of one's own aim. And that has to, this is somewhat revisiting what we talked about before, but it ties in with where we've reached and where we're going to go forward. So the Sugata has the two interpretations of being the attainment of the state of ultimate well-being, which is literally what Sugata means, in which all the obstacles have been abandoned, obstacles to knowledge, and then all the realizations have been fully attained. Attained highest realization. So those two elements are part of the Buddha's Dharmakaya, if you like. And then the quality of being a savior are the elements of the Buddha that refer to his physical aspect. His physical aspect is the means by which the Buddha communicates what he saw himself and attained himself, and then conveyed to others in whatever way was most suitable to his audience at the time. And so that physical aspect is mainly identified or associated with the supreme Nirmanakaya form of the Buddha, which is, for example, Buddha Shakyamuni. And so both of those elements are the qualities by which we recognize the Buddha as someone who became the ultimate spiritual authority. And so Rinpoche said that maybe for this teaching, those points that have been given today should serve as kind of the foundation for the general explanation of what pramana means. And now we'll go forward with the discussion about how they apply to and what it means in relation to the Buddha. Page 81, if you're using the same edition of the book that Rinpoche is looking at. Someone showed me, I think people have it.
삼법중도 음료수는 열에 조합중도 기준 등일에 배부 중도 주도가 이해하라 그러는 조가 대신이 주의를 어떻게 Tambola, Samba Fude, Tambi,
So we're going now past all the Pramanavarttika discussions, which deals with divine, the refutation of divine creator, and going to the four attributes, and so that's what I'm looking for. If indeed, Tawana Jena, the Okay, so the first of the four attributes is the most excellent or the perfect attitudes. One of the main causes, the main motivation for seeking enlightenment is compassion. And so that is verse 34, I believe, Greek text. Yes. Wow. Tutte come lo nell'ula temperatura come tu tutti mandarese se ne chibu tutti 당부 tutti 세 se ne chibu tutti 당부 tutti 가르레스나 네 삼바들이 tutti tutti 지부자가 뭔가 네 세야들이 tutti 지부 tutti 지부 뒤에네 지부 tutti 그걸 제발라 당부는 무슨 그래디 당부 타다 중에 그가 되게 이지게 이 제수 중에시를 탁 공부하라 제발 공부하라 이 그게 standard information tutti 제부 뒤치지 그게다 메디베 그 나랑이 내가 남아 공부하지 다 넘버 재미있게 붙이니까 담보지 가르치잖아. 투지 친구들과 상 안돼 군디 붙이지 되나? 정말 그가 돌아 계시 바르르가 돌아 같이 참시 받이래봐. 다들 이 타와는 전 투지 공부를 했으니까 어디 이제 So this verse 36, it starts out by saying the proof. Sadhanam or drupje means the logical proof for the assertion or the claim that the Buddha Bhagavan is the one who became his ultimate spiritual authority. That's the thesis. And then the first proof is, so it says the proof, right? In the verse it starts off saying proof of that claim is tulche gomle. It is, the first reason is because he cultivated compassion. So that's the first reason. And because he cultivated compassion, is a reference to the first of those four attributes of saying that the Buddha is the one who is desirous of benefiting the world. So that attribute of being the one who is desirous of benefiting the world is interpreted as a reference to great compassion, not just compassion, but Tukche Chenpo, great compassion, in the Mahayana sense of compassion. And that's the first proof, or the first reason to establish that the Buddha is or became an ultimate spiritual authority.
That's ini yang curi wayar coba. Tadi community ini kaji bercerita ini community biar. Kita kerja suri. Ya jauh tu maklum ni di kerja suri. Gyumed dan itu betul cuma dicuci. Gyumed dan itu betul. Julian, ini rangi nama orang cumi ceri. Tujuh cuma dicuci. Coba cuci. Malam pun betul cuci ibadah. Coba tak ceri itu balai. Tomar cuci itu malude. Cuci itu tadi. Tadi ya, kamu tujuh cuma sana kerja sana. Tak tujuh cuma seperti. Jadi nara jenis tujuh cuma seperti sangat macam itu. Tujuh cuma dikerjakan saya. So, jadi nara. Tujuh cuma dikerjakan. Di nasi jadi tak tujuh cuma dikerjakan nasi, sudah nasi jadi. Tak tujuh cuma kagak. Sini jadi. Tetapi di channel tujuh cuma kami kagak meres. Tujuh punya des tambah seperti ini cuma cewek. Tadi yang ini cuma cewek. Jadi ini cuma tujuh cuma kagak meres.
So, to take up now this topic of compassion, so just to read the phrases in the text, it says, this is, well, you have the Tibetan, I don't think anybody has the English, so I'm not going to tell you what it is, but if you found the place, then it says, in order to show how great compassion is a valid means of proving that the Buddha is a being who is a true spiritual authority, we have to recognize that it is something that must precede his attainment of that status. So if it's in this sense, the proof of it, the cause of it is that the proof of it is that that compassion serves as a cause for becoming enlightened. And it says initially, Tala Dumele Joy Deva Yijike Nedejas Duneshu. How is it a precondition for becoming an enlightened being, the supreme enlightened being? It says, because in order to become enlightened, he's saying, and rather than to achieve liberation, you have to initially develop the great compassion that wants to liberate all sentient beings. Hadat means all beings. And after you've generated that compassion, that great compassion, then you cultivate the knowledge that is the means to put an end to suffering. Even for a Buddha, to become a Buddha. So Buddha puts it in attaining his enlightenment. He's also ending his own suffering as well as then following that ending the suffering of others. So first he has, but to become a Buddha, as he terminates suffering, first he has to develop compassion in order that that path will be one that will lead to Buddhahood rather than some lesser goal. So that is how he will become ultimately the teacher, right? Then the teacher in the sense of the one who, it has two meanings, right? It has the meaning of the wisdom, which is the cause that enabled him to become the teacher who teaches others. So that's the second of those two causes. And then, then just to interject, Rinpoche said that when we talk about, we're saying here that that first cause, this initial cause for becoming the supreme authority, spiritual authority, is great compassion. So when we say great compassion, Mahakaruna, then Tibetans have, in Tibetan, you can use you can distinguish terms by an honorific. So, for instance, if you say to Buddha, you will say Pu Sung Tu. For an ordinary person, you say Lu Nai Yi or something like that. The same way, compassion, if you want to distinguish it somewhat, you can say Tukje Chembo. As Tukje Chembo is a more kind of reverential way of saying great compassion, or you could say in a more common way, Ningje Chembo. So the reason for distinguishing those terms in Tibetan is, in the case of the Abhidharmakosha, the Abhidharmakosha says that a great compassion is only a term that's only used to refer to a Buddha. Only a Buddha has great compassion. So it means that in the Hinayana sense, great compassion has that exclusive and distinct meaning, quite different from Mahayana. And so Buddha said in the Abhidharmakosha, it describes that Buddha's great compassion as having 8 unique attributes to it. But in any case, the main point is only the word great compassion only applies to a Buddha. Then we have other Buddhist traditions, typically Mahayana position is that it's not exclusive to a Buddha. So we can say that there are sentient beings, non-enlightened beings, who have great compassion. And so then in this case, this text represents that point of view, which says that great compassion is a necessary cause that precedes the attainment of enlightenment. So this is just making a clarification about different schools' views about the nature of compassion. And then the text goes on to say that great compassion that we're talking about here, Gyumed. So this is a well-known phrase which says that things arise, that causally produce things, of which great compassion is one. It's a mental entity, it's an impermanent entity. Is something that is not produced without a cause. It doesn't just arise spontaneously. So not Gyumed, it's not something that is uncaused, nor is it something that arises from an inappropriate cause. Mitubekyu means something that is, anger is not the cause for compassion. That would not be a suitable cause for compassion. So compassion arises from something other than unsuitable causes, or something that is, it is not something that is without a cause. So then it says, why? Because compassion, and this is kind of the basic point that's being made about the nature of great compassion is great compassion, the great compassion that Bodhisattvas have, is derived from cultivating those mental states which are of a similar class of mind as great compassion itself. Rang is Rang is here, its own is referring to great compassion. Great compassion is, in this case, a result, something that you achieve, then it becomes the cause or seeking Buddhahood. But to achieve great compassion itself, it comes from a continuum of causes that are a similar type of mind. So what that means is we all have the capacity to develop some form of loving kindness and compassion. So in certain circumstances, we all will develop a sense of empathy or concern for others. Problem is that that for most of us, that compassion is limited, or it is only directed toward certain types of beings and not towards others. So we have to refine it. And if we do refine it, then eventually that class of mind that represents the most fundamental elements of compassion can ultimately then become true great compassion. So saying that's the only way to gain great compassion. Doesn't just pop into being, and you can't engage in activities that are antithetical.
아니 자체로 제부탄이 드네 이제 탐제는 아니 저 이게 아들아 네 이제 처음으로 제가 이건데서 이거는 내제 이제 단위 파마스 칸 간데지네 아니 가는 미지야 아니 내제 견디도 남기 계획 중에서는 제가 이제 전부 지금 나라도 내지 이제 단위 파스미라
그렇죠.
나라도 지나 나는 내가 진행에 내지 이제 통일도 아니 저와지 랑게 남기 계야지 양아가
그렇죠.
이제 우리 이제 지금 계야나 그래서 자니 라는 내가 진행에 나 발말을 나는 대화하는데 당연히 제 집행이 진행이다. 이제 내지 이제 발마스 내지 아니 차를 집체수 랑이 난기 내지 대부분도 지키구나 아니 이제 지금 모습이 이게 아니야. 이면은 이제 지금 이게 안 나요.
So then we all have the kind of the basic ability to develop some form of loving kindness, caring for others, and wanting others to be happy and wanting to free others of suffering. But in order to gain great compassion, you have to refine that capacity that we have, that natural ability that we have to develop those mental qualities, emotional qualities. Then, so the kind of the essential point that needs to be understood of how that quality of wanting to benefit others, what form it has to take is, so it says, Gyumed Jingi Semten. So it starts out with Gyumed Jingi Semten, means no matter what sentient being we may perceive, kind of like me, it's whoever we happen to turn our attention to. Then Gyumed, in order to identify them as Gyumed, it means we have to understand what it means to be a suffering being. Not in the ordinary sense of suffering, but really in the sense of a samsara suffering. So we have to have a refined sense of what it means to be suffering as well. And so the point is that we start from there. We we look at our sentient being and we know that that sentient being is like, as we are suffering sentient being, they also are suffering sentient being. And then no matter what sentient being we may encounter, then it adds the description adds the three qualities of Janyin, Dharma, so. So it's kind of three basic categories of others that there can be are other that's an enemy, an other that is a friend or a relation, and an other that is neither, by which it means a stranger or someone that you have no feelings one way or the other, positively or negative. So then it's saying no matter what kind of person it might be, of those three types, then rangi langi means spontaneously, naturally, effortlessly. As soon as you see that being, then you will generate the desire to free them from the suffering, the deep sense of suffering that you know them to be subject to. So that's the kind of compassion that you have to have in order to say that you have great compassion.
That is that Sangi to teach him said that Tina the Samba to said that Chambaya Inkia Litina
Awesome.
that is that you understand.
So with that basic explanation of what we mean when we say great compassion, then tomorrow we'll start talking about elements of that great compassion. So it includes the qualities of loving kindness. It includes also bodhicitta, as well as, of course, what compassion itself means. And then we will discuss that, presumably as it is addressed generally, and as well as it's addressed in the text. So we'll take that up starting tomorrow morning. So with the remaining time, some questions. 8 questions, some questions.
Any question about the definition of the correct cognition? There's a the non-deceptiveness.
Oh yeah.
And the non-deceptiveness related to the action of the thing that you're perceiving, the entity that you're perceiving. So with fire, you use the example that non-deceptively against perceiving fire would be that you're perceiving that it can burn, incinerate something. So is that to say that if you perceive it in its forms of colors, like it's got orange and red, is that technically an incorrect cognition? And let's say that you look at something like the cloth covering the table, and you see, that it has qualities of color and it's almost like an art form. You don't necessarily perceive the action of it or even recognize the relevance of it. So I guess what I'm saying is, and then who determines what that particular definition of the non-deceptive action is? And then does that undermine the notion of things not having fixed qualities?
Does that, if it's arbitrary or if it's flexible, does that?
Well, not that it, but if there is, if we accept that there's a non-deceptive way of looking at an object, like fire incinerates, then does that undermine the notion that things don't have fixed qualities?
The things don't have fixed qualities.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you mean by, that's a loaded phrase. What do you mean things don't have fixed qualities?
Things are empty.
Oh, okay. So he wants to introduce concept. Okay, well, that's why I said that. Karsa, semi kola, ani, so di, ani, karsa, milua, milua, kuchiki milua, so kuchini na, that catches you keep that. Then a D young, surely I am. Milua say the digital go on a senator. You be more young Mari, cranky lay, cranky mind the legend, digit you lay the and a man in such a separate rushing you, but the crying on below and that would come that continue the sort of so you are it. Then the day in a met the touching seconds, cranky that was make Koran rangi US and cranky last jealous of the 50. Yina, and met Dilia, Alabama, not to do the met Pariana, met Pariana, and to met the Taduran, Macron, the Major Degree, Koran yard, soup yard, Kasai, leave yard, Kado yard, no, you can cut it, separate Francis Marawa, and Chetan, and the Tonua, and the Kalsa, Maggie, Kato, and Maggie, Magic, Yip the Taduga, that the Toge may Yimbali, Sama, Mahiba to the rest.
Mahiba to the Malitico, Yip the Kato to Suletani, to be annually. Let's say that Society Chawachini, the Tower, because to Chawati, the Yoga, it is many India, Kari, the may make us at the Society Chawachini in the Tower.
That the kind of chachi. And then the compare the chocolate on chocolate, and has a red that they have chocolate on the other and the carrying the chip. Dianco, that's some of the chocolate pocket, some of that chip as of the rock. Then a Karsa, and a lady, Krana, Medic, Dungeon, Ranching yours of Rangi, Takache, jealous or figurity. Takarsa, Sama Digi, Togiana, Korokot Samayimati, Kot the lady Togiana, Ane Karsa. Thank you well now, share this over Rashing Juba, Rashing Matuba Karangi, that Rashing more, such a step more to Yamares, Titanian thoughts, Kalama West, Kagatuma West.
Such liberty are the to Syrian. Such liberty, tangible yare, such yare. So see it our children with yare, so see it our children. Rashing between the Chilean.
All right, so answer looks pretty easy. So he said, the fire, when you're looking at fire, you see the color and the shape. That's not, that doesn't represent the essential nature of the fire, and you're not perceiving the fire's quality of burning and incinerating. But that is not to say that perceiving the colors are a deceptive awareness or a false kind of awareness. It's even though it's related to fire, but it's the color and the shape of the fire are not the fire. So that was one response. And I think your example of the clock on the table is kind of similar to that. But he said, so as far as the not having fixed qualities, as you put it, he said that the Prasanghikas don't deny that fire has the quality of heating or having the ability to alter the quality, nature of the thing as fire can do, or incinerate it in its extreme form. They just don't believe that is its self-existent quality. It's not a quality that exists independently in the object, independently of the mind that perceives it. So it's not a self-existent quality, but it, conventionally, I think, is they use that word, but I think obviously that's the meaning, is that conventionally fire does have that attribute.
So slightly related to that, Rinpoche said when we got the definition of valid cognition of Sarvamudita, Rinpoche said that the Prasangikas do not accept the Sardu part. Since Gyaltsap is giving us this definition, should we assume that Gyaltsap is giving us a Svatantrika commentary on Dharmakirti? And if who would be giving the Prasangika commentary that omits the Sardu part of the definition?
Okay, I understand. I think that's something that comes up, and the Tibetans are quite familiar with that idea. So, 그래서 딱 가르쳐 디 아니 저만 남들 당에 처음에 진이들 사도 미루었어. 그게 아래 아니스 디 사도 이 그게 아래. 사제시 디 아까서 테마 많이 받고 그런 스투타레스. 제가 아니 계속적이 아니 계속적이 딱한 제가 좀 했는데 아니 디더다디 준비하래 아니 디 제가 우리가 코로나라고 땡겨서 솔직히 시작을 제가 저번 남자들 제가디 다음 스테이지라고 계속적인 나머지 아니 우마랑 두번 자셔도 왜 스케치
다단데 디체나 센터를 시작하는 거
가리네 좀 가리네 그러나 정경계를 라는 비거나
라는 말이 그 룩들이 시작되는 거예요. 그냥 아파트에 센터에 따라 되는 프로그램. 아파트는 음악가리. 그래서 센터에 그 센터에 시작되는 중국의 것입니다. 브라운 음악가이니
This is a very familiar sort of issue for Tibetans. So there's a notion of rangluk. Rangluk means what is your own view about something. And shenluk would be something that is at odds with that and you don't agree with. So in the case of this commentary, Pramanavarttika, you would say shishak. Shishak means that he starts from the premise that he is explicating the Chittamatra position as it is represented in this text. That doesn't mean that's his final view by any means. And so that's one point. That was kind of the direct answer to your question. And what's added to this, that we say, for instance, and this is anyway, this is something that is certainly familiar to Tibetans as well. They will maintain, for instance, that Asanga. So we refer to Asanga as Arya Asanga, right? He's mentioned in the sutras as someone who achieved in different sutras certain levels of a Bodhisattva Arya. So if he achieved the level of Bodhisattva Arya, then that means he must have achieved direct realization of emptiness, right? Because the Gelupas view Khensur school as the correct representation of reality, and so then regardless of what text Asanga may have been involved in their composition, and regardless of what philosophical position, some of the 5 texts, the Gelupas say that they're associated with different schools. Some of them are Chittamatra school, some of them are Madhyamika school, and some of them are Prasangika Madhyamika school. So that means that Asanga adopted that point of view for that text, but his own position would have been something different. So that's kind of.
I think you misunderstood the question. I got that.
Right. Well, so this is not being written from the point of view of the Madhyamika school.
Right. So, but my question was, Rinpoche said that the Prasangika presentation of sound condition omits Sardu.
Right.
I was saying, who gives that presentation? Who has presented
the fact, the Prasangika view of correct cognition. I'm sorry. Then Tengyuagi Teme Kor in Tibetan, among Tibetans. It's
Or
Takayin Chik Jaragi Kewa Inandra, Koragi Kewa Inandra, and Tengyuagi Teme Kor, Teme Namsha, Tengyuagi Ralu Yimati, Chinitan, the Shung Yagati, and the Congested Mountain is Kandi, Logan Jaggers, Gandagis, Kawachi Sasha.
That Tengyuagi Semeting Kunayari, Miluasia, Semeting, the Chema Citizen Bayanchi, Chema Citizen Bachi, Cheme Dangerous Jerva. She don't take the Cheme Danger, Chamber or Cherry Tart of the data. Thank you, thank you, Cherry Tart. Diesa Frank cementing reality, to take a system combatant to take a cementing the Ugama is. But I done this cementing reality.
Doesn't the any Bechishana? Not super, right? 6 days.
Oh,
6 days, they'll come with another Pamay or what the should do. So, commentaries to the Bodhisattva Avatar 9th chapter. 9th chapter discusses issues relating to the subject of Pramana. Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara. There is in the 6th chapter, there's a specific section that addresses the nature of Pramana as he understands it. Also in the Prasana Pada, 1st chapter, he explicitly rejects Dignaga's views on Pramana. So the point, the direct answer that Gyumed gave was that you shouldn't think that Buddhist epistemology texts are limited to the so-called historical Indian epistemological school as represented by Dignaga, Dharmakirti, and Swallow. That we can think of many other great scholars, and some of whom were Prasangikas, whether they were Indian or whether they were Tibetan, and that their writings address explicitly and directly the topic of what constitutes correct cognition, minus that extra point of the original cognition of reality or the object. Is that good? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Can do.